What if the darkest secrets of a forgotten American town weren't just stories told to scare children, but warnings carved in blood? In this chilling tale, we follow a weary stranger who arrives in the isolated town of Millersfield, only to uncover a centuries-old curse that refuses to die. As shadows lengthen and whispers echo through abandoned farms and haunted woods, every step closer to the truth drags them deeper into a nightmare where survival is uncertain and the price of curiosity is terrifying. Dare to face what lies beyond the veil? It started with a smell, sickly sweet like overripe fruit left too long on the counter, but beneath it, something rotting. The bus hissed as it rolled into the edge of Briar Glen, tires crackling over loose gravel, its engine stalling out with a cough that sounded oddly human. Morgan slung her backpack over her shoulder, stepping down into the humid dusk of rural Tennessee. The air pressed against her skin, thick with pollen and the sharp scent of pine. The dirt road that led to her aunt's house twisted away from the highway like a trail of veins carved into the woods. This was the first time she'd been back in 15 years. Briar Glen hadn't changed, still just one gas station, one general store, and a Baptist church squatting like a fat toad beside the cemetery. The trees leaned close to the road as if eavesdropping. Her cell signal was already dead. Classic. Morgan walked. The deeper she moved into the forested path, the more the world shrank. The cicadas screamed from the canopy, a bone-deep shrill that never quite faded, just changed pitch depending on where she stood. Her boots sank slightly into the soft earth. Moss clung to the trees like old bruises. She passed the rotted remains of a wooden sign once nailed to an oak. Briar Hollow, carved in faded childish scrawl. Unbidden, a memory surfaced. Her mother dragging her away from here one summer night, suitcase half packed, whispering, "Don't look back, just keep walking." She hadn't. Not until now. The house came into view at the top of the hill, crouching beneath a canopy of weeping willows. The paint peeled in long curling strips, and one of the upstairs windows gaped open, the curtains shifting like breath. Aunt Clara's house. Or at least it had been. She didn't expect anyone to be home. Clara had died 6 months ago. The key was where the lawyers said it would be, inside a rusted Altoids tin beneath the porch floorboards. Morgan crouched, retrieving it with stiff fingers, every creak of the wood sounding like a warning. The front door groaned when she opened it. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with mildew and something else. Something faintly metallic. Blood, maybe, or something pretending to be. She paused in the foyer, letting her eyes adjust. Dust motes hung in the air like suspended ash. The grandfather clock stood silent, hands frozen at 3:13. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing water damage that spiderwebbed down the hall. Morgan exhaled. Just a house, she whispered to herself. Just memories. But her skin prickled as if the house were listening. She explored cautiously, her boots thudding against the warped wood floor. The furniture remained, sofa covered in a white sheet like a corpse. The rocking chair that always creaked without wind, and the photo wall in the hallway. Dozens of frames hung at uneven angles, images of family members long gone, black and white portraits, faded Polaroids, a few recent snapshots with timestamps in the corners. One frame was cracked. She reached to adjust it and paused. The photo inside showed her as a child. She remembered the moment, sitting on the front steps in a sunflower dress, ice cream melting down her wrist. But the woman beside her wasn't Clara. It looked like her mother. Morgan leaned closer. The woman's face was blurred, almost smudged, like someone had rubbed a thumb across the print. But the eyes, those eyes were hers. She took the photo off the wall and slid it into her bag. As night crept in, the temperature dropped sharply. She lit one of the candles she found in a drawer, the kind that smelled like cinnamon and old wax. Upstairs, the boards groaned. The second floor had always unsettled her, even as a child. Something about the way the light never quite reached the end of the hall. She climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing. The carpeted steps sighed under her weight. There were 3 rooms. Clara's bedroom, a guest room, and the attic door. The attic was chained shut. Morgan stared at the padlock. Fresh, untarnished. The chain looped twice through the handle, thick and deliberate. Who had locked it, and why, if no one else lived here? She tried the doorknob out of instinct. It didn't budge. She bent down and pressed her ear to the wood. Silence. Then, faintly, shuffling. She yanked her head back, hard in her throat. "Nope," she said out loud. "Hell no." Instead, she opened the guest room. It was mostly empty, just a bed frame, an old mirror, and a wardrobe that smelled of cedar and mothballs. She dropped her backpack and sat on the edge of the mattress. Sleep came fitfully. She dreamt of water dripping, of footsteps on wood, of someone whispering her name in the dark. She woke up at 3:13 a.m. The house was utterly still. No cicadas, no wind. She sat up. The mirror across the room reflected nothing. Not the bed, not her, just the room. Empty. Morgan's throat tightened. She reached for her flashlight and shone it toward the mirror. Her reflection flickered into place, delayed by a second, just long enough to feel wrong. And then it smiled. She hadn't. She stumbled back, knocking over the lamp on the nightstand. The crash loud enough to echo through the floorboards. And when she looked again, the mirror was normal. Her reflection mirrored her exactly. But her skin was cold, her heart thudding. She didn't sleep again. By morning, the woods outside were quiet. She ventured to the back porch, where the garden used to be. Now it was just weeds and wildflowers, overrun with vine. A line of 7 small stone markers stood in the far corner, like grave markers without names. She didn't remember those being there. She approached slowly, brushing dirt from the top of one. No name, just a crude carving, a spiral. The same spiral that had been scratched into her bedroom wall when she was 5. Her mother had painted over it twice, but it always bled through. She turned back toward the house. There was a girl in the upstairs window. Morgan blinked. The window was empty. She went back inside. She had to know what was behind that attic door. Morgan stood at the base of the attic stairs, staring at the chain as if it might slither free on its own. She hadn't told herself she would do this. Not last night, not this morning, but something inside her had shifted. It wasn't just curiosity, it was gravity, a pull deep in her chest. She went to the kitchen, rummaging through drawers until she found what she needed. Bolt cutters rusted at the hinges, but solid, the kind her aunt probably used for fencing, or old padlocks on the barn. The attic door loomed like a sealed tomb. She tried not to hesitate as she slipped the blades of the cutter through the chain's link and squeezed. A loud clack echoed down the hall like a gunshot. The chain fell away. She grasped the doorknob. The air behind it was colder, unnaturally so, as if the temperature dropped 10 degrees the moment the door cracked open. Her breath fogged in the dimness. Wooden stairs ascended into shadow. She climbed. Each step groaned under her weight, the sound swallowed quickly by the dense hush above. At the top was a crawlspace, more than a room, low-ceilinged exposed beams, and the overwhelming smell of mothballs, old wood, and mildew. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, its pull string swaying gently as though just disturbed. She tugged it. The light flickered to life. And she froze. The attic was filled with mirrors. Dozens of them, maybe more, leaning against the walls, stacked on crates, some propped up on rusted easels. None were clean. Dust obscured most of the glass, but behind each layer of grime was a glimmer of reflection. Warped, cloudy, like staring through water. She took a cautious step forward. The air grew thicker. Her ears began to ring. On the far wall stood a massive mirror, framed in what looked like iron, its corners etched with symbols she didn't recognize. Spirals, crossed circles, interlocking lines. Her heart pounded louder. She stared at her reflection. It stared back, but unlike before, this time the delay was longer. A beat. 2. Then the mirror Morgan tilted her head, slightly, but not the way she had. Morgan blinked, took a step back. The reflection did not. It smiled. She turned and ran. Her boot caught on a loose plank, and she hit the attic floor hard. Pain shot up her shin. As she scrambled upright, she saw something strange. In one of the smaller mirrors beside her, a door that wasn't there in the attic. It stood behind her in the reflection, made of rotting wood with a rusted iron handle. She turned. In real life, nothing, just wall and crates. But in the mirror, the door remained, closed, pulsing faintly, and something moved behind it. She couldn't breathe. There was a sudden sound from below, sharp and metallic. The front door slamming? Someone else was in the house. She bolted down the attic steps, skipping the last two, landing hard on the floor below. The silence downstairs was intact, too intact. She listened. No footsteps, no voices, only the low hum of something watching. Morgan locked the attic door again, wrapping the chain 3 times around and clicking it shut. She backed away from it slowly, never breaking eye contact with the handle. Her phone still had no signal. The landline was dead. She considered leaving right then, just walking into town and not stopping. But as she turned toward the front door, her foot hit something hard. A book. It hadn't been there before. Its cover was cracked leather, the binding stitched with red thread that looked too much like sinew. No title. She picked it up and opened the front page. The handwriting was tight and frantic, like someone writing too fast to care about neatness. It began mid-sentence, bound by sight, sealed by the 7th name. She walks between, neither dead nor dreaming. Do not speak her name aloud. Do not show her your reflection. And above all, never, never let the clock strike 3:13 while you faced the mirror. Morgan stared at the ink. It was faded and smeared in places, but the words were clear enough. The page beneath contained a sketch, crude, charcoal drawn, a figure hunched, faceless, with arms too long and fingers that seemed to bend backward. Beneath it, a single word scratched in capital letters: Mother. She slammed the book shut. The clock in the hallway, the one frozen yesterday, ticked. Once. She looked at it. The hands had moved. Now it read 2:58. She didn't stay still. Morgan grabbed her bag, threw the book inside, and stormed out of the house, down the porch steps, down the dirt path, deeper into the woods. She didn't care where she ended up. She needed fresh air, distance, answers. She followed a path she didn't remember. A side trail that cut west through the trees. And yet, it felt familiar, the way you recognize a song from childhood. The forest opened up into a glade, sun-drenched and quiet, unnaturally quiet. At the center was a stone circle. 7 flat stones arranged in a spiral, each with a symbol carved into it. The same spiral as on the unmarked grave. Morgan walked toward it. She paused at the edge. The air buzzed with static. Every hair on her arm stood up. She stepped inside the circle. The world shifted. The shadows around the clearing stretched. The sun dimmed. A breeze hissed through the grass, whispering something in a language she didn't know but could almost understand. Then a voice, not hers, not anyone she knew, spoke from directly behind her. "You shouldn't be here, Morgan." She turned and saw her mother, but it wasn't. The eyes were too black, the mouth too wide, her head tilted at a wrong angle, like a doll someone had dropped and hastily glued back together. And her hands, long and thin and shaking, held something behind her back. Morgan couldn't move. The woman smiled and blood spilled from the corners of her mouth, trailing down her neck like ink. The clock inside her chest ticked once. The thing wearing her mother's face took a step forward, and behind her the trees whispered one word over and over until it drowned out the wind. Welcome home. They say the mind will do anything to protect itself from what it can't explain. Morgan learned that firsthand the moment she blinked, and the clearing was empty. No mother, no stone circle, no spiral etched in the dirt. Only the cold press of silence, too complete to be natural. She stood in the middle of nothing, heart hammering in her chest like a trapped animal, Her breath fogged, though the air didn't feel cold anymore. Her legs trembled. She wanted to scream, but her throat had locked. Her fingers clutched at the edge of her coat like a child clinging to a blanket. What had she seen? No, wrong question. What had seen her? Morgan turned and walked, fled, back through the woods, crashing through thickets and roots, unconcerned with direction. The path she thought she had followed was gone. The trees had closed in like ribs around a lung. Every step felt like she was being swallowed whole. By the time she reached the cottage again, the sun had already begun to dip behind the pines. She hadn't been gone more than an hour, and yet her watch read 7:19 dots. She didn't remember it getting dark. Inside, the house felt colder, emptier. The rooms breathed with her. The shadows leaned a little farther than before. She turned every light on and double-locked the front door. Then she dumped the contents of her satchel onto the kitchen table, her hands trembling. The book lay there, inert and quiet. Its pages crackled when she flipped to the one with the sketch. Still there. The faceless woman. Mother. Below the illustration were more notes, written in increasingly erratic script. The mirror is her eye. The attic is her gate. She lives between the tick and the tock. The hour of offering is near. 7 stones, 7 names. Do not speak the 7th. Morgan ran her hand through her hair, unsure if she wanted to scream or cry. There was no explanation for any of this, no logical footing, and yet she knew it was real. That face, her face, stretched across a frame of skin and mimicry. That thing had looked at her like it had known her before she was even born. She shut the book and shoved it aside. She needed answers. If there was anyone who might know anything about what was happening, it was one of the last people who'd spoken to her mother before she died, Silas Corbin, the groundskeeper. He'd been with the estate for nearly 30 years. Even after her parents had left Graymire Hollow, he still lived on the far end of the property, near the edge of the woods in a trailer surrounded by junk and rusted machinery. Her mother had warned her to avoid him when she was a child. That alone made him worth visiting. Morgan grabbed a flashlight and a kitchen knife just in case and left through the back door. The sky had bruised into violet, and the trees sighed in the wind as if murmuring secrets to one another. Her boots crunched over wet leaves as she followed the gravel path that wound behind the property and through the underbrush. Halfway down the trail, she spotted a figure. At first, she thought it was a deer, slender, unmoving. Then she noticed the way it stood. Too still, too straight. A girl, barefoot, wearing what looked like a pale hospital gown, stained at the hem with mud. Morgan stopped. Hello? The girl didn't move. Her head was tilted slightly downward, hair hanging like a curtain over her face. Her arms dangled limply by her sides. Morgan's instinct screamed, "Run!" but her feet stayed rooted. The flashlight flickered once, twice. Then the girl lifted her head. Her eyes were completely black. Morgan dropped the flashlight. The beam twisted, bounced, landed at an angle that cast the girl's shadow across the trail. It didn't match her movements. It writhed, crawled, as though it were a separate creature. Morgan stumbled backward, heart clawing at her ribs. The girl's mouth opened slowly, too wide, and a wet, choking noise gurgled from her throat. Then she stepped forward. Morgan turned and ran. Branches whipped her face. She didn't care. She didn't look back until the trailer's porch light appeared like a beacon through the trees. She reached the clearing, skidded up the steps, and banged on the door. Silas. Open the damn door. There was silence. Then the slow rasp of a bolt unlatching. The door cracked open, and a narrow sliver of an old man's face appeared. Wrinkled. One eye clouded white with cataract, the other sharp as broken glass. He didn't look surprised to see her. You shouldn't be out here, he said. Someone was. There's a girl. No, there isn't. He opened the door fully, stepping aside. Morgan entered, breath hitching. Silas's trailer was a chaos of books, papers, and hanging charms made of feathers, teeth, and knotted thread. Jars lined the shelves, filled with dark liquids in indistinct shapes. The scent of tobacco and burnt sage filled the air. He closed the door. Sit. She obeyed, because arguing felt too dangerous. "I saw her," she said. "In the woods, and earlier, in the attic, in a mirror. It wasn't my mother. It looked like her, but it wasn't her. And there's this book." "I know," Silas said. She blinked. "You know?" He poured a mug of thick black coffee and placed it in front of her. Then he sat across the table, folding his hands. "She's awake." "Who is?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into a drawer and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a group of women standing in a field, 7 of them, all in black, veils over their faces. Morgan picked it up. "That's your mother, second from the left," Silas said. Her hands shook. This was taken in 1986. They called themselves the Hollow Daughters. The what? A covenant. Not witches. Older than that. They didn't cast spells. They made deals with things older than fire. Morgan stared at him. Silas continued. "They kept the land safe so long as certain rites were followed. Offerings, names, mirrors. But they broke the pact. Your mother was the first to walk away. And now something wants revenge?" "No." Silas shook his head. "It's not revenge. It's reclamation. You were born under her name, the 7th name. You're the final seal." Morgan's throat tightened. "Seal for what?" Silas looked at her, truly looked, and whispered, "To bring her through." The trailer creaked. The lights flickered. And from somewhere outside, just beyond the window, came the soft sound of bare feet on wet leaves. Silas didn't move. He stared toward the window, as if listening to something only he could hear. Morgan held her breath. The footsteps stopped. Then came the knock, not at the door, at the glass. Tap, tap, tap. 3 slow knocks, deliberate, like it knew they were inside and was simply reminding them. "I thought you said there wasn't a girl out there," Morgan whispered. "There isn't," Silas muttered. "Not anymore." Morgan backed away from the window, but the curtain shifted slightly, just enough for her to see the silhouette beyond. The same girl, the same hair, but now her head was tilted at an impossible angle and her arms hung limp, fingers grazing the porch like strings on a marionette. "She's looking for a way in," Silas said. "They always do." "Who is she?" Morgan asked. "The thing in the woods in the mirror, what is it?" Silas sighed and pulled a small wooden box from under the table. He opened it and retrieved a rusted key and a scrap of aged vellum. "She doesn't have a name, not one we can use without consequence. But your mother called her the Hollow Mother. She was summoned once, long before you were born. Your mother's circle didn't understand what they were calling. Not really. They just wanted protection, power, a blessing on the land." Morgan tried to swallow, but her throat felt dry. "So they summoned a god?" "Worse." Silas looked at her with grim finality. "They summoned a memory, pretending to be one." The words hit her like ice water. He unfolded the vellum. On it was a diagram, 7 circles, overlapping at the center. Around them were symbols Morgan couldn't read, each more angular and cruel than the last. She lives in the in-between. Mirrors, silence, dreams. Any place where reality bends thin. They sealed her using 7 names, each one belonging to a daughter. But now those seals are breaking. "How?" Morgan asked. "Why now?" Silas met her gaze. "Because you're here." He pointed to the 7th circle on the diagram. "Your name is the last. Your blood woke her." Morgan stood abruptly. "This is insane. My mother never told me any of this." "I don't believe in spells or—" "Then don't call it magic," Silas snapped. "Call it consequence." He stood, shoulders shaking slightly from age. "You want this to go away? Then burn the book. Smash every mirror in that house. Sleep with salt at every door. And most of all," he leaned in, his breath acrid, "don't look into her eyes. Not even once." Morgan couldn't speak. Silas pressed the key into her palm. "This opens the root cellar behind the house. Your mother kept things there. Ritual tools, journals, maybe even answers." Morgan closed her fingers around the cold metal. Then, from the direction of the woods, a scream tore through the night. It wasn't human. It sounded like it had once been, but something had stripped the soul from it and left only echo and malice. Silas flinched. Morgan felt her spine lock. The girl was gone from the window. "You need to leave," Silas said, suddenly frantic. "She's not alone anymore. You're marked." He moved toward the door and began muttering in a language Morgan didn't understand, sprinkling ash and string over the threshold. "Go. Take the back path, stay off the main road, and for the love of whatever's left in this cursed town, don't let her speak your name." Morgan bolted from the trailer, gripping the key like a weapon. The trees were alive with noise now, crackling brush, rustling limbs, whispers that didn't ride the wind but slid beneath it. Her boots pounded the ground as she ran, lungs aching. She could feel something behind her, always just out of sight, mimicking her steps. When she reached the cottage, she slammed the door and locked it 3 times. Then she bolted the windows, turned on every light, and only then allowed herself to exhale. She took the key and stepped out back, where an old storm hatch lay half covered in leaves and ivy. The metal groaned as she pulled it open. The stairs descended into darkness, and the air that blew up smelled like old rot and candle smoke. She hesitated. Then she descended. Each creaking step echoed like thunder. The walls were stone, the floor packed dirt. Cobwebs brushed her face. She turned on her flashlight. The cellar was cramped, filled with old trunks, jars, books wrapped in cloth, bundles of dried herbs. And in the far corner was an altar. It had been carved into the rock itself, 7 notches, 7 candle stubs, and at the center, a cracked mirror framed in rusted iron. Morgan stepped closer. The mirror flickered. Just for a second. She saw a room that wasn't the cellar. A nursery, lined with peeling wallpaper and a mobile of birds above a crib. Then it was gone. She heard a whisper. "Morgan." She spun around. No one there. Again, the whisper, this time behind her. "Morgan." She faced the mirror. Her reflection blinked, but she hadn't. She backed away slowly, heart rattling, and turned to leave, but the stairs were gone. Stone wall. Solid. Seamless. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing her hands to it, scratching at the dirt. From behind her, the mirror shimmered. Her reflection smiled, and then it stepped forward, through the glass. The sun didn't rise over Andal Court Tower. It bled. A sickly, molasses-red light oozed through the thin curtains of apartment 902, as if filtered through a film of blood. Elise woke with a sharp intake of breath, the taste of iron thick in her mouth. She didn't remember falling asleep. Didn't remember lying down at all. The last thing she recalled was standing at the hallway's edge, the number 902 shimmering oddly on the door plate, as if trying to peel itself off the wood. Beside her, the couch was empty. No sign of Marcus or the files he'd spread across the cushions. The room smelled faintly of sulfur and something else. Decay, maybe, or mildew left to rot behind walls for years. She rose, dizzy, her neck stiff. Her phone was dead, the screen blank and cold no matter how long she pressed the button. She stepped into the hallway. It wasn't the one she remembered. This corridor had no end, no beginning. The wallpaper was peeling, stained in Rorschach blotches of what looked too much like old blood. Overhead, the lights flickered in a rhythm that made her heartbeat stutter. Every so often, one bulb would buzz out entirely, then flare back on with a sound like bone snapping. "Elise?" a voice whispered. She turned too fast. Shadows danced across the hallway, and for a moment, she saw a figure. No, not quite. A smear, a movement in the dark. Then it was gone. She wasn't alone. She knew that much now. The apartment across the hall was cracked open. Not ajar, no. It looked almost chewed. The door frame splintered inward like something massive had pushed its way through. On the wall outside it, someone, or something, had scratched into the paint with jagged fury. Below the tower, it still breathes. Elise swallowed hard. The diary she'd found yesterday in the archives had mentioned something about a sleeping mouth, a phrase she'd thought poetic nonsense, but paired with this? No. She wasn't going to rationalize anymore. Not after seeing the photograph of the missing tenants with all their eyes scratched out. Not after the black mold had formed a perfect, symmetrical circle on her apartment's ceiling and dripped dark, oily tears. She backed away from the door, but the hallway didn't let her. With each step, the walls seemed to shift imperceptibly. The further she moved, the more the architecture bent, warped, the angles losing Euclidean sense. The hallway curved despite being straight. Windows blinked into existence only to vanish again. At one point she passed a small wooden rocking horse, child-sized, eerily pristine though covered in ash. By the time she stumbled back into apartment 902, her knuckles scraped and her breathing ragged, she wasn't sure how much time had passed. And Marcus was there, sitting on the couch, staring at her. No files, no papers, no blood. Just a man with sunken eyes and a voice that sounded wrong, like it had to remember how to use syllables. "Elise," he said slowly, "I found something." He extended a hand, and it was a cassette tape. Old, worn, no label. "There's a player in the basement. Only one." Elise took it without speaking. Her hands were trembling. Marcus looked odd, like he'd been sculpted from the memory of himself, not flesh and blood. His mouth smiled, but the smile didn't touch his eyes. She knew she had to go down there. The basement of Andlecourt Tower had been sealed off for years, at least according to the building's schematics. But the janitor, Mr. Halverson, had once drunkenly mentioned a sublevel, older than the rest of the bones, he'd said, before laughing like it was a joke he couldn't explain. As she headed toward the service elevator, the walls of the building whispered. She could hear them now. Low, soft. Not language exactly, but intention. Like the rustle of leaves made from skin. Like the memory of screams pressed between floorboards. At the basement level, the elevator doors shuddered open. It wasn't a basement. It was a ritual site. The space was vast, impossibly large, far larger than the footprint of the building. The floor was stone, not concrete. Old, cracked stone with etchings, spirals, and geometric patterns that hurt her eyes to focus on. A narrow path was lit by candles that hadn't burned down a single inch, flickering in a windless space. At the far end, a pedestal, and the tape player. She stepped forward, each footfall echoing too long. Behind her, the elevator snapped shut. She reached the player and inserted the tape, pressed play. At first only static, then a voice, male, broken, desperate. "They fed us to it. We didn't know." The lease said nothing about the blood. "Don't trust the walls, don't look through the cracks. And if you find the stairwell, God help you, don't go down. It's not a stairwell, it's its throat. And once you're inside..." The recording cut out. Elise stared at the tape. Her reflection on the chrome surface of the player wasn't hers anymore. Her face was warped, elongated. Her eyes were gone, just black pits staring back. And behind her reflection, something moved. She turned. In the dark beyond the candlelight, a shape unfurled, towering, shimmering with a thin membrane of shadow and smoke. It had no face, only a mouth. And it opened. From its throat came a single word: retreat. She ran, not toward the elevator, it was gone. Not toward the candles, they were snuffed out. Only the spiral and the stone remained, glowing now with a deep crimson light, pulsing like a heartbeat, her own. She didn't remember falling, only the moment her knees gave out and the whispering became a scream inside her skull. And when her eyes opened, she was lying in her bed, back in apartment 902. Everything normal, curtains drawn, morning sunlight outside, Marcus humming in the kitchen, but scratched into the ceiling above her in what looked like scorched soot were the words, "I let it in." And the closet door was slowly creaking open. Simon stood at the threshold of the attic, the journal clutched to his chest, his breath fogging in the stale, dusty air. The smell of mildew and dry rot grew heavier as he climbed, one slow step at a time. Each creaking board beneath his feet felt like a signal to the house, to whatever was watching that he was entering its domain. He swallowed the tightness in his throat and pushed the hatch fully open. The attic was darker than he expected. The single small window on the far end was filthy, streaked with grime, letting in only a faint, sickly yellow light that made everything feel jaundiced. Cobwebs hung in thick ropes from the beams like decaying lace. Old furniture and boxes were stacked haphazardly, covered in dusty tarps. It was every cliché he'd ever seen in horror movies, and yet being here felt worse. The cliché was real now. It breathed. Simon stepped inside, the floor groaning under his weight. He held Daniel's journal in one hand and a small flashlight in the other, sweeping the beam in slow arcs. There was a coldness up here that felt unnatural, deeper than just poor insulation, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, into your thoughts. The kind that whispered, "Run," in a voice almost like your own. The journal pages rustled faintly in his hand, as though the book itself wanted to speak. He knelt beside a stack of crates near the center of the room, flipping to the last entry Daniel had written. March 5, 3:13 a.m. It knocked again, louder this time. I think it's growing bolder. I locked the attic last week, but I hear it above me. The scratching, the breathing. I wake up with bruises. My fingers aren't mine anymore. They feel like wood. Stiff, hollow. I don't think I'll make it to morning. I'm leaving this book here, just in case. Simon closed the journal slowly, his mouth suddenly dry. He remembered the knock on his door just days ago, at that same hour. The whisper. It knows you're here now. The attic was silent, oppressively so, until a soft click echoed behind him. The hatch door. He spun around. It had shut itself. Not slammed, just clicked shut. The sound of something precise, intentional. Simon crossed the attic, heart thundering, and tried to lift the door back open, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, as if latched from the other side. He pounded once, twice, and then stopped when he heard it. Scratching. Not from the hatch. From beneath the floorboards. He stepped back, the beam of his flashlight trembling. The scratching came in quick bursts, like fingers, no, claws, digging upward. Then it stopped. A moment of silence followed, long enough for him to begin hoping. Then, bang, a sharp, violent thud from beneath the floor. Something was trying to get out. Simon stumbled back, nearly tripping over an old wooden chest. He shone his light downward, searching for gaps in the floorboards. There, near the center of the room, was a panel that looked newer than the rest. Less dust-covered. The nails around it were bent, as if forced in with hands shaking or unwilling. Daniel's last entry came back to him. I locked the attic. Not locked out, locked in. And suddenly, Simon knew. Daniel hadn't been afraid of what was outside the attic. He had trapped something inside. The floor thumped again, harder this time, and Simon heard it clearly. Breathing, slow, guttural, just beneath the panel. He didn't know what madness drove him, but he moved toward it. Something in him needed to know, needed to see. He dropped to his knees, pried at the edges with his fingers. The wood was splintered and rough, resisting, as if the panel itself wanted to stay closed. With one last wrench it came free, and the moment it did, cold air burst upward like a gasp from the bowels of the earth. The space beneath wasn't just a crawl space. It was a pit, a deep, narrow shaft lined with ancient brick, descending far beyond the attic's foundations. Simon couldn't see the bottom, even with the flashlight. He leaned in a little closer. That's when he saw them. Handprints, lining the inside of the shaft. Hundreds of them. Some smeared, some small, some impossibly long. And all pointing up. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. But when the light returned, there was a fade, just for a second. A pale, angular face, inches from his own. Eyes like wet ash, and a mouth too wide, too wrong. Smiling in the dark. Simon screamed and fell back, the flashlight clattering across the floor. The beam spun wildly, throwing shadows across the room. When he scrambled back up, the pit was dark again. Empty, but not silent. A whisper rose from the shaft, curling up the walls, like smoke, like rot. "You opened it." Simon grabbed the journal and flashlight and ran to the hatch. He pounded, screamed, shouted, but no one answered. And above him, the whispering had begun to echo. Not just one voice now, dozens. "You opened it. We saw you. He's watching again." The air thickened, heavy with pressure. The attic felt smaller, closing in. The voices chanted and hissed, and Simon curled into a corner, hands over his ears, eyes shut tight. Then quiet. Total. The hatch opened with a soft click. Simon looked up, trembling. The hatch was ajar, light spilling from below. He didn't wait. He bolted for the exit, scrambled down the ladder, and slammed the attic shut behind him, chest heaving. Fuck. He didn't stop moving until he was back in his bedroom, door locked, curtains drawn, and every light on. The journal lay open on his desk. New writing had appeared on the final page, in a spidery, ink-black scrawl. "Now you've seen him. You brought the name back. Don't say it. Don't think it. Don't write it." Simon stepped back, pulse racing. Then he noticed his mirror. There was something on the glass. A handprint. From inside the reflection, and beneath it, scrawled backward, "He lives in names." They say sleep is an escape, a shelter from the waking world's chaos. For Simon, sleep had become a war zone. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the shaft, the faces, the whispering mouths that never moved but still spoke in unison, in layers of voices. Some broken, some childlike, some not human at all. He hadn't slept more than an hour in the past 2 days. The journal remained locked inside his desk drawer, but he didn't need to read it again. The final entry had burned itself into his mind. Don't say it. Don't think it. Don't write it. But the warning had come too late. He had seen it, and now it was seeing back. The handprint on the mirror was gone the next morning. No residue, no smudge, but in its place, something worse. His own reflection didn't blink when he did. It stared longer. Its mouth twitched independently. He stopped looking at mirrors altogether. The days began to bleed together. He started sleeping with the lights on. Every single bulb in the apartment, even in the microwave and fridge. He unplugged the television because its static had started whispering his name. He boarded up the attic hatch, then reboarded it again after the nails came loose the next night. He knew he was losing it. But he also knew he wasn't wrong. On the third morning, Simon's phone rang. The number was unknown. He almost didn't answer, but something, instinct, dread, maybe just loneliness, made him pick up. "Simon Fletcher?" a woman's voice asked. He hesitated. "Yes, who's this?" "I'm Dr. Miriam Lake. I work with cases involving anomalous psychological disturbances. I think we should talk." "In person?" He blinked. "Did someone refer me?" "No, you found me. I don't." "You left a voicemail last night, repeating a name, and then you screamed." Simon's stomach turned. "I never made that call." Silence on the other end. Then, "Come to 179 Camden Row. Bring the journal. Don't be late." The line went dead. Simon stared at his phone. His call log had no outgoing call to that number, but a recording had appeared in his voice memos. 34 seconds of silence, followed by a single whisper. "He wants the name spoken again." He left within the hour, clutching the journal like a crucifix. Camden Row sat on the edge of the city, past rows of hollow buildings with boarded windows and graffiti choked in ivy. The address led him to an old townhouse, half its bricks scorched as though licked by fire decades ago. A rusted plaque by the door read simply, "The Night House." Simon pressed the buzzer. A moment later, the door clicked open. Dr. Miriam Lake looked nothing like he expected. Young, maybe in her mid-30s, sharp eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses, hair tied back in a frizzy bun. She wore a navy coat over a faded turtleneck and ushered him in without a word. The house was silent. The walls were lined with shelves of old books and bound files, but no technology, no phones, no clocks, no mirrors. "You're not the first," she said quietly as they sat across from each other at a low wooden table. "And if you're not careful, you won't be the last either." Simon placed the journal on the table, but Miriam didn't touch it. Her gaze locked on him instead. "You've seen it?" he asked. "I've studied its appearances," she replied. "It follows patterns, names, words, sequences. It's not a ghost or a demon, it's something older, a concept, a mimetic parasite." Simon frowned. "A what?" "An idea that kills, one that spreads through thought like a virus. It infects when you perceive it, a sound, a word, a symbol. Once you've been exposed, it begins reshaping your reality, first with dreams, then hallucinations. Eventually, it replaces you." Simon's mouth went dry. "Replaces?" Miriam nodded grimly. "That's why the attic shaft exists. It's not just physical, it's metaphorical, a tunnel between you and it. And the further down you look, the more it climbs out." He wanted to scream, to run, but instead, he opened the journal to the page he had found in the attic. "What is this then? A containment?" "Not entirely." Daniel rose. He tried to trap it using ritual constraints, but he misunderstood something crucial. Containment doesn't kill it, it waits. Simon leaned forward. "Waits for what?" "For the next mind weak enough to open the door again." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Miriam pulled a folder from a drawer and slid it across the table. Inside were crime scene photos, yellowed with age. One showed a mirror cracked in a perfect spiral. Another showed a man curled into a fetal position inside an open attic hatch. A third, Simon recognized immediately. It was his apartment building. The picture was dated 1978. "It was there before you," she said softly, "and it'll be there after you, unless we sever the connection." Simon closed the folder. "How?" Miriam hesitated. "We go back, together. We follow the path Daniel marked and perform the cutting ritual." He stared at her. "You mean go into the shaft?" She didn't flinch. "Only halfway. Any further and it notices." Simon exhaled shakily. "When?" "Tonight, 3:13 a.m. He knew that time too well. That night, Simon stood outside his attic hatch with Miriam beside him. She held a silver bowl etched with symbols and a candle flickering with black wax. Around them, chalk markings ringed the ceiling. Miriam held out a narrow blade. "This is ceremonial. One cut. Blood seals the words." Simon nodded. His hand shook as he sliced his palm and let a drop fall into the bowl. Miriam did the same, her voice low as she began to chant. The attic hatch clicked open. Not slammed, not creaked, just clicked, like it had been waiting. Together they climbed into the dark. The boards groaned. The candle's flame didn't flicker, but the shadows moved anyway. They reached the shaft. It had changed. Now it breathed, wet, shuddering inhalations that made the floor vibrate beneath their knees. Miriam handed him the bowl. "Repeat after me. Do not stop, no matter what you hear." They began. The chant was guttural, ancient, burning in his throat. And then, something from the pit below screamed. Not a human scream. "Something wrong," Simon kept chanting. The wind rose, pages fluttered in the journal, the walls cracked, Miriam's voice wavered, her eyes darted to the shaft. "Don't look," Simon rasped, still reciting. But Miriam did. She looked, and she froze. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, and her body twisted. Her skin turned pale, her eyes rolled back, then she dropped, straight into the pit, yanked downward by an unseen force. Simon lunged, but too late. She was gone. Then something climbed up the edge. A hand, long fingers, and a face, too close, too fast. Simon stood frozen at the edge of the shaft, the cold breath of the abyss licking at his face. Miriam's scream had been cut short, swallowed by the darkness below. His heart thundered violently in his chest, the chant dying in his throat. The silver bowl slipped from his trembling hands, shattering on the wooden floor with a sound that seemed deafening in the thick silence. The hand that had emerged from the shaft wasn't human. Its skin was mottled and wet, veins pulsating with an eerie black light beneath the surface. The fingers were impossibly long, ending in curved nails sharp enough to shred flesh. The face attached, if it could be called that, was a grotesque mockery of a man's visage. Eyes sunken, lips peeled back over jagged teeth, and an expression twisted into a permanent sneer. Simon stumbled backward, scrambling away from the edge, but the creature's eyes locked on him with unnatural intelligence. It hissed, a sound that was part growl, part whisper, before retreating into the shadows. The attic hatch slammed shut. Simon gasped for breath, knees buckling as he collapsed onto the floor. The journal lay open beside him, pages fluttering as though caught in a phantom breeze. His mind spun, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Miriam, she was gone, and now something else was here. He gathered what little courage he had left and rose slowly, eyes darting around the room. The house seemed to hold its breath, every creak and groan magnified in the suffocating silence. Simon's hands shook as he reached for the journal. Flipping through the pages, he found a hastily scrawled note in Daniel Rose's handwriting. If she's taken, the ritual is incomplete. The parasite adapts, it learns, it spreads. A cold dread settled in Simon's stomach. This was no longer just about survival. It was a race against an intelligence that fed on fear, on knowledge, and on the minds it could claim. He pulled on his jacket and stepped outside. The night was thick with fog, the kind that swallowed light and distorted sounds. The street lamps flickered sporadically, casting uneven pools of yellow that barely pushed back the darkness. Simon's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. The screen showed a single word: run. Panic surged through him, but he forced himself to think. Who had sent the message? Miriam had no phone here. Could it be her? Or worse, the entity? A sudden crash from the house's interior spun him around. Windows shattered, glass raining onto the porch steps. Simon bolted inside, heart hammering. The house was no longer quiet. Shadows moved independently of their sources. The books on the shelves trembled as if breathing. The walls seemed to pulse with an unseen heartbeat. Simon backed toward the attic hatch, which now pulsed with an unnatural glow. He had no choice but to open it again. Below, the shaft yawned wider than before, a pit of ink-black darkness that seemed to suck the very light from his torch. He descended carefully, each step echoing into the void. Halfway down, the air grew colder, and an overwhelming sense of being watched settled over him. Whispering voices floated from the depths, faint but unmistakable. They spoke in a language that curled around his mind like smoke, teasing out memories not his own, faces of long-dead victims, echoes of screams, and the chilling certainty that the shaft was a gateway. Suddenly, the torch flickered and died. Simon was plunged into darkness. Frantically, he fumbled for his phone's flashlight, its weak beam barely piercing the black. Then, he saw it. The walls of the shaft were lined with carved symbols, runes interwoven with twisted human forms and serpentine shapes. The etchings pulsed faintly with a sickly green light, illuminating the abyss just enough to reveal a figure waiting below. It was Miriam, or what was left of her. Her eyes glowed white, devoid of humanity, her skin pale and translucent. She extended a hand, beckoning Simon forward. "Come," she whispered, voice hollow and distant. Simon hesitated, torn between fear and a desperate hope that she was still in there somewhere. As he reached out, the shadows around them coalesced into tendrils, reaching for him with icy fingers. He pulled back, stumbling over loose stones. A sudden voice cut through the darkness, not Miriam's, but deeper, darker. "You cannot sever what is bound by blood and fear," it hissed. The tendrils tightened, pulling at his limbs, whispering secrets meant to unravel his mind. Simon fought against the suffocating grasp, teeth clenched, mind screaming for release. With a burst of adrenaline, he lunged upward, scrambling out of the shaft. He collapsed onto the attic floor, gasping for air as the hatch slammed shut once more. But the house wasn't done with him. From the corner of the room, a mirror shattered, shards falling like rain. In the broken glass, Simon saw countless reflections, each one twisted, each one a different version of himself, consumed by fear and madness. One reflection smiled back and mouthed a single word: welcome. Outside, the first rays of dawn bled into the sky. Simon sat on the porch steps, the weight of the night pressing down on him like a shroud. The journal lay open in his lap, the words no longer just ink on paper. They were a map to a nightmare he could no longer ignore. He knew the path ahead was darker than anything he had faced, and the entity in the shaft was waiting, hungry. The town of Millersfield had always worn its history like a faded coat, worn, patched, but never forgotten. On the surface, it was just another dot on the map, a sleepy Midwest town lost in the folds of time and surrounded by endless cornfields. But beneath its quiet streets and white picket fences lurked secrets that refused to die, whispers of the past clawing through the present like skeletal fingers. Simon drove slowly through the town, the early morning mist clinging to the windshield and muffling the world outside. His eyes scanned the storefronts and cracked sidewalks with a mixture of dread and determination. He wasn't sure what he was looking for exactly, only that the answers to the darkness chasing him were buried somewhere here. He parked outside the Millersfield Historical Society, an aging brick building with peeling paint and shuttered windows. The sign out front hung crooked, swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, Simon hoped to find records, old newspaper clippings, anything that might shed light on the curse that had begun to unravel his life. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and forgotten memories. Shelves crammed with yellowed books and brittle documents lined the walls. Behind the counter, an elderly woman looked up, eyes sharp despite her years. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice soft but firm. Simon nodded. "I'm researching something unusual, a local legend maybe, something tied to this town's history." Her gaze flickered with something unreadable, then she gestured to a back room. "You might want to speak with Mr. Turner. He's the custodian of the archives." The back room was cramped and dimly lit. Rows of filing cabinets stood like sentinels and piles of documents spilled from every surface. A man with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses looked up from a faded ledger. "You're after the old stories, huh?" he said, voice gravelly. "Millersfield's got plenty. Some folks say the town's built on cursed ground." Simon swallowed hard. "I'm looking for anything about the Rose family, Daniel Rose specifically. His disappearance." Turner's eyes narrowed. "Ah, that's a name that stirs up trouble. There was talk back then, whispers of dark rituals, sacrifices, and a shadow that followed the family like a bad omen." He pulled out a folder, its edges frayed. Inside were photographs, letters, and newspaper clippings dating back decades. One headline caught Simon's eye: "Local man vanishes after strange events at Rose Farm." Simon traced the faded words with his finger, feeling a chill creep up his spine. Turner continued. "Daniel Rose was obsessed with uncovering something beneath the land. Said he found signs of a presence, something ancient and hungry. Folks thought he'd lost his mind." "Did anyone try to stop him?" Simon asked, heart pounding. "Some did, but fear kept most at bay. The town's always been wary of what lies beneath. An old evil, they say. They called it the Wraith of Millersfield." The name echoed in Simon's mind. He remembered the carved symbols in the shaft, the serpentine figures, the twisted runes. This was no coincidence. Turner leaned in, lowering his voice. "There's a ritual, an old one, said to bind the wraith and keep it trapped. But if it's broken, well, the darkness spreads." Simon's hands clenched into fists. "Do you know where this ritual was performed?" Turner hesitated. "At the old Rose farmstead. Abandoned for years, but no one dares go near." The thought of returning to that place filled Simon with dread. Yet it was the only lead he had left. Before he left, Turner handed him a faded map of the surrounding area. "Be careful, the land remembers, and it doesn't forgive." Outside, the mist had thickened into a low-hanging fog that swallowed the streets. Simon folded the map carefully and tucked it into his jacket. He headed toward his car, the weight of history pressing down on him like a suffocating shroud. As he drove toward the outskirts, the landscape began to change. The neat rows of corn gave way to tangled woods, gnarled trees arching like twisted sentinels over the narrow dirt road. His headlights pierced the gloom, illuminating the skeletal remains of the Rose farmstead ahead. A crumbling farmhouse and dilapidated barn surrounded by wild overgrowth. Simon parked and stepped out, the cold air biting at his skin. Every step toward the house felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted his presence. Inside, the farmhouse was a mausoleum of memories. Broken furniture lay scattered, walls stained with age and neglect. But it wasn't the decay that unsettled Simon. It was the oppressive silence that hung like a shroud. He explored cautiously, flashlights sweeping over peeling wallpaper and cracked windows. In the kitchen, a rusted iron kettle still sat on the hearth, cold and silent. Then he noticed the symbols, scratches on the floorboards, etchings on the walls, matching those in the journal. The ritual had been performed here. His heart quickened. In the corner, half buried under debris, he found a small wooden box. Inside were relics, charred bones, dried herbs, and a silver dagger with a twisted handle. Simon's fingers trembled as he lifted the dagger. It pulsed faintly, as if alive. A sudden noise snapped his attention to the door, a low, guttural growl from outside. He froze. The growling grew louder, closer. Simon rushed to the window, peering out into the darkening woods. Shapes moved between the trees, hulking forms with glowing eyes and snapping jaws. His breath caught. The creatures were no ordinary animals. They were the twisted remnants of the curse, hunting the farmstead's grounds. Panic surged through him. He grabbed the journal and dagger, bolting for the door. Outside, the fog churned as the creatures closed in. Simon ran, heart pounding, every step a battle against the suffocating terror pressing from all sides. Suddenly, he stumbled and fell into a shallow pit hidden beneath the undergrowth. As he scrambled to his feet, the creatures circled, their snarls echoing through the night. Simon raised the dagger, the silver blade catching the moonlight. "Come on," he muttered, voice shaking but defiant. The nearest beast lunged. The battle had begun. The silver dagger sliced through the heavy air, its blade catching the moonlight as Simon fought for every breath, every heartbeat. The snarling creature lunged again, jaws snapping inches from his arm. Desperation lent him strength. He twisted and thrust, feeling the cold sting of metal bite into flesh. The beast howled, a sound like the death of 1,000 souls, and recoiled, blood darkening the fog. But the victory was fleeting. More shapes emerged from the woods, shadows with glowing eyes and twisted limbs, closing in with relentless hunger. Simon scrambled to his feet, clutching the dagger tight. His mind raced. He needed a plan, a way out beyond sheer force. He dashed toward the crumbling barn, the creatures snapping at his heels. The barn door hung ajar, its rusted hinges groaning as he shoved it open and slipped inside. Inside, the darkness was thick, the scent of rot and old hay mingling with cold dread. The creatures hesitated at the threshold, growling low but unwilling to follow. Simon pressed his back against the splintered wood wall, panting. His heart thundered in his chest, the silver dagger still grasped like a lifeline. Then he noticed the ritual circle, etched faintly into the dirt floor. A series of twisted symbols, matching those in the journal. Faint embers of a long-extinguished fire still clung to the edges, and dried sage lay scattered about. This was the heart of the curse. Simon's fingers trembled as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the journal. Flipping frantically, he found the page with the ritual's instructions, a desperate last-ditch method to seal the darkness again. But it required a sacrifice. A sharp knock echoed from the barn door. Simon froze, breath hitching. The door creaked slowly, and the shadowy figures pushed it open, slipping inside like mist. The barn plunged into chaos. Simon swung the dagger, striking at the nearest beast, but their numbers overwhelmed him. He tumbled backward, crashing into the dirt floor. Pain exploded across his side as claws tore at his jacket. cold breath hot on his neck. A voice whispered in his ear, low, ancient, cruel. "You cannot run, Simon. The curse is part of you now." He spun, heart pounding. There was no one, only darkness, and the creatures closing in. Summoning his last reserves, Simon slammed the journal onto the dirt and traced his finger along the ritual symbols etched on the page. He began to chant, voice shaking but determined. The creatures hissed, retreating slightly as a strange energy pulsed from the circle on the floor, glowing faintly beneath him. The barn shook, dust falling from the rafters. The creatures snarled and lunged again, but the glowing circle formed a barrier, keeping them at bay. Simon's chant grew louder, his voice a trembling thread binding the ancient curse. Then a sharp crack split the air. The barn door slammed shut behind the creatures, cutting them off from Simon. Breathing heavily, Simon looked down at the dagger, now glowing with an ethereal light. The ritual was working, but at what cost? His vision blurred. Memories flooded back. Daniel Rose's desperate notes, the screams that echoed through time, the townspeople who vanished without a trace. The curse was not just a force of darkness. It was a cycle, feeding on blood and sacrifice. Simon gritted his teeth, pushing past the pain. He had to finish. But then, through the flickering light, he saw a figure in the doorway. A woman, her face pale and eyes hollow. "Help me," she whispered. Simon's heart stopped. It was her, the ghostly figure from the journal, the last victim of the Rose curse. She stepped forward, translucent and trembling. "Break the cycle," she urged, "or it will consume you too." Suddenly the barn doors burst open. The creatures surged inside, and the woman screamed, a sound that pierced Simon's soul. He raised the dagger, chanting the final words. A blinding light filled the barn, scorching the darkness. Then, silence. Simon opened his eyes to an empty, cold barn. The creatures were gone, but so was the woman. And the dagger, now just a dull, lifeless blade. Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing a blood-red dawn breaking over Millersfield. Simon stumbled out, exhausted and broken, clutching the journal. As he looked back at the barn, the ground beneath it cracked open, revealing an endless void. From its depths, a whisper drifted on the morning breeze. "This is only the beginning." The night was heavier than before, as if the darkness itself was waiting. Patient, hungry, inevitable. Simon stood at the edge of Millersfield, the early morning fog swirling around his boots, obscuring the familiar streets he once called home. The town looked smaller now, drained of life and hope, the weight of the curse pressing down like a suffocating shroud. He clutched the battered journal tightly, its pages worn from desperate readings and frantic scribbles. A fragile thread connecting him to a truth no one else dared to face. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the distant cawing of ravens circling overhead. Simon's thoughts raced as he took a slow, deliberate step forward. The void beneath the barn had swallowed more than darkness. It had swallowed the remnants of the town's soul, the echoes of generations caught in the endless cycle of pain. His mind drifted back to the woman's pale face, her hollow eyes pleading for salvation. Was she the key to ending this nightmare? Or just another pawn, trapped like him in the unyielding grasp of an ancient curse? As he passed the cracked foundations of the barn, a chill ran down his spine. The ground beneath him trembled faintly, as if something far below stirred, awakening from a long slumber. The journal's ritual was incomplete, the price not yet paid in full. Simon's fingers traced the worn symbols etched onto the page, searching for a clue, a final piece to the puzzle. The answers lay buried deep in the forgotten lore of Millersfield, intertwined with its dark past and the restless spirits that haunted its every shadow. He moved towards the old church on the hill, its silhouette jagged against the dim sky. The local sheriff had once warned him to stay away. This place was no sanctuary, but a tomb of secrets better left undisturbed. Yet Simon knew that salvation and damnation often walked hand in hand, especially here. Inside the church, dust motes floated through the fractured stained glass, casting fractured rainbows onto the worn wooden pews. The air smelled of decay and forgotten prayers. At the altar, a faded tapestry depicted an ancient scene, a circle of figures bound by chains, struggling against an unseen force. It was the same ritual Simon had seen in the barn, a cruel dance between light and shadow. A sudden movement caught his eye, a journal lying open on the altar, its pages yellowed and fragile. Simon approached cautiously, heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. The journal belonged to Reverend Crowley, a man consumed by his own battle against the darkness that plagued Millersfield decades ago. His final entries spoke of a sacrifice greater than any before, a ritual not of binding but of release, a way to shatter the curse forever. But it required a choice. To end the cycle, someone must become the new vessel, willingly accepting the curse's burden to save the rest. The price was a lifetime of torment, isolation, and the slow erosion of humanity. Simon closed his eyes, the weight of that destiny pressing down on him. He thought of the townspeople, the families torn apart, the whispers in the night, and the faces of those lost to the darkness. Could he bear the cost? Before he could answer, a cold gust swept through the church, extinguishing the candlelight and plunging the room into shadow. From the darkness emerged a figure, tall, gaunt, with eyes like burning coals. The entity that had haunted Millersfield revealed itself fully, a manifestation of the curse's unyielding hunger. It spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "The cycle must continue, Simon. Choose or be consumed." Simon's heart thundered as he grasped the journal and stepped back toward the church's threshold. The choice lay before him: succumb and become another lost soul, or fight against the impossible to save what remained. Outside, the first rays of dawn pierced the horizon, promising a new day, yet carrying the weight of ancient shadows. Simon took a deep breath, ready to confront his fate. The first light of dawn barely pierced the heavy fog that clung to Millersfield like a shroud. As Simon took a hesitant step back into the church's cold shadow, the oppressive presence of the entity, the curse-made flesh, loomed before him, its fiery eyes never wavering, its voice grinding like ancient stone. To choose or be consumed. The weight of those words settled deep in Simon's chest, each syllable a crushing blow that threatened to shatter his resolve. Around him, the dust in the air seemed to dance with unseen whispers, echoes of 1,000 souls trapped in the cycle of torment. The church walls, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage closing around the last hope of a town, teetering on the edge of oblivion. Simon's fingers tightened around the worn journal, Reverend Crowley's desperate testament to a ritual beyond salvation and damnation. The final entry burned in his mind, a choice between becoming the new vessel of the curse or watching everything crumble into eternal darkness. He thought of Emily's pale eyes, filled with fear yet shimmering with fragile hope. The memory of the townsfolk who had vanished without a trace haunted him, their stories scattered like ashes on the wind. The curse was more than a shadow. It was a living, breathing entity feeding off pain and despair, thriving on the fragile line between life and death. A shudder coursed through Simon's body. To accept the curse was to sacrifice his humanity, to live forever trapped in a liminal state of suffering and powerlessness. To refuse meant doom, not just for him, but for the last remaining souls clinging to Millersfield. But Simon was no stranger to sacrifice. He had lost too much already. As the entity advanced, the church seemed to warp, the stained glass twisting into grotesque shapes that bled color into the suffocating gloom. The tapestries fluttered as though caught in a phantom breeze, their ancient chains rattling in a silent cacophony. The shadows stretched and twisted, reaching for Simon, whispering his name like a prayer and a curse entwined. He steeled himself and opened the journal, eyes scanning the ritual's final instructions once more, words etched in desperation and blood, calling for a willing soul to bind the curse and bring an end to the cycle. "I will do it," Simon whispered, voice barely audible over the relentless storm of shadows. The entity paused, a flicker of something almost like respect. or perhaps amusement glinting in its burning eyes. So be it. The church trembled, the ground beneath Simon's feet cracking as an otherworldly energy surged through the space. The curse wrapped itself around him like icy chains, cold and merciless, seeping into his very bones. Agonizing visions flooded his mind, generations before him, all consumed by the same fate, all trapped in the same eternal dance of suffering. His body convulsed as the ritual completed, his humanity slipping through his fingers like smoke. Yet, amid the torment, a strange clarity emerged. He could feel the curse's power pulsing beneath his skin, an unholy strength born of despair and rage. Simon's breath came in ragged gasps as the entity withdrew, its form dissipating into the darkness. The church grew still, bathed in a fragile dawnlight that seemed almost at odds with the darkness now housed within Simon. He was the vessel. Outside, the town of Millersfield lay silent, its streets empty but for the cold wind that carried the faintest whisper of a warning. The curse had not ended. It had simply found a new host, a reluctant guardian trapped between salvation and oblivion. Simon stepped out of the church, eyes scanning the horizon. The fog was thinning, but the air remained heavy with unspoken threats. Somewhere in the distance, a raven's call echoed like a death knell. He knew the price he would pay. His soul was no longer entirely his own, bound to the ancient darkness that had consumed so many before him. But he also knew the curse's hunger could be staved, if only temporarily. For now, Simon would fight, not just for Millersfield, but for the fragile hope that one day the cycle might truly be broken. But as he walked down the deserted streets, the shadows lengthened and moved with a will of their own. The curse was patient, and it would not rest until it had claimed all. And in the distance, beneath the twisted limbs of an ancient oak, a figure watched, its eyes glowing faintly in the gloom, waiting for the moment Simon would falter. Because in Millersfield, some darkness never truly dies. The night had only just begun. Thank you so much for joining me on this dark journey through Millersfield's haunting secrets. I hope this story sent chills down your spine and kept you hooked until the very last word. If you enjoyed diving into this world of rituals, curses, and supernatural mysteries, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting that notification bell so you won't miss any of the spine-tingling tales coming your way. Remember, sometimes the scariest stories aren't just about monsters or ghosts. They're about the shadows lurking in the corners of forgotten places, and the choices we make when faced with the unknown. Stay safe out there, keep your lights on, and never ignore the whispers in the dark. Until next time, thanks for watching, and beware what hides beyond the veil. See you in the next story.